Today we are going to be looking at agriculture. There's two different types of agriculture practices, sustainable and traditional. So we're going to look at each of those and some of the differences between them. First of all, let's just talk about agriculture. Agriculture is farming. Again, only write the bolded parts, but if that is something you do not know, then you can jot that down. But agriculture is simply farming. So farming is nothing new. That's been going on for thousands of years. That's how everybody got their food, was they had to grow it. People couldn't just go to the store back in the day. They had to grow their own food. Farming's been really good because it allows us to feed a lot of people, especially if you have your main farmers who grow the food for you. I know some of you probably would not want to get up at 3 a.m. every day to take care of different plants and animals, just so that you had food and work all day, every day, all year. And that's what farmers do. So we're very, very, very thankful for them because it is so much hard work, and that does allow us to have the food that we need. So today's farming, though, is very different than it was in the past. Not only different than it was in the past, meaning 10,000 years ago, but different in the past in terms of even about 50, 70 years. Farming has just changed so much. And so that's what we're going to be looking at. And so the main point of this slide was just to know that farming is very different than it was a while ago. So that was all you needed to write down. So I'm going to keep on going. So the first type of farming we're going to look at is conventional or traditional agriculture. And yes, this whole slide is bolded, so you do need to write it down. Conventional or traditional farming, it has a bunch of different names that it goes by. So it could be conventional, it could be traditional, or sometimes they will call it industrial farming. So there's 3 names total. Conventional, traditional, industrial, all are the same thing. It's the same type of farm. People just have different names. But this is how the majority of our food is currently being made. So when you go to the grocery store and you buy something, the farming practices we're about to talk about is probably what was used in order to grow that particular food. The whole goal of a large-scale farm is to make the most amount of the food in the smallest amount of space. Because if you can make more food in less space, then what's that going to save you? It's going to save you a lot of money. These farms are ran more as an industry, which is why it's called industrial, because it's just focused more on the amount of money that you get for the food you create for the product you're making, rather than the quality of the product for people's health. So that's kind of what these particular types of farms are looking at. So as we talk about traditional and conventional farms versus sustainable farms, we are going to kind of look at the extreme of both sides. There are farms that are kind of more in the middle, but to give you the opposite end of the spectrum, that's what we're going to talk about. But all farms are different, so just keep that in mind as you go. Okay. Hopefully you're done writing this slide down. If it's just like one person that's not done writing down, then we will need to move past, and you'll have to just pick up your writing pace. But as we continue in notes, if I am going faster than what the class needs, it's fine to pause it to let everybody finish writing the notes. But if it's just one person consistently, then so sorry, but write faster. So let's keep on going. So this is what a lot of people think of a farm when they imagine it in their head. You got your little piggies, and you got their little house, and they're outside. But in reality, what it looks more like is this. So this is the reality of hog farms. And a lot of you have probably driven past some hog farms like this. If you notice when you look on these back walls, there's no windows. And a lot of the reason why there's no windows is because if people could see into some of the conditions that these animals are being raised, then they would have some big problems with it. People say ignorance is bliss, and in a way that's how it is here. So these pigs have no windows, they have no fresh air, and notice there is no ground here. This is not dirt. There's no dirt. This is just cement. So these are pigs that are put in these little cages. They can't even turn around, and that's where they live their entire lives with no fresh air or anything like that. So you can imagine how miserable that is, but also think about it this way. An animal that is raised in an unhealthy manner is then an animal that you are eating. So is it the best animal for you to eat? Not necessarily. The healthier the animal, the healthier it is for you to eat that meat product. So there's two, you could care about it because of the quality of life of the animals, but you could also care because of the quality of the product that you're consuming. There's two sides of it. Let's keep looking. This is just another picture of an actual hog farm up close. You can see where the pigs, you can see how tight the cages are, but you can also see where some of the pigs have rammed their heads into the bars because they're trying to get out. And you can just see how many of them are all there. This is what some people picture when they think of plants, but this in reality is more like an industrial farm. That is a plane that is spraying pesticides. It is not water. There are some like irrigating planes, but this is a plane that is spraying pesticides on the crop as you go. And again, we then consume that product. So the less we should care, because the less pesticides, the less we are consuming of that. So I have this video that I want y'all to watch. It's called The Matrix. I don't know if any of you have ever seen the Matrix movie, but this is kind of a funny spin off of the Matrix that has to do with conventional agriculture. So I'm going to let you go ahead and pause this video while you play the video for the Matrix. So what we're looking at now are, I guess I can talk to you a little bit about the Matrix video. We already talked some about the hog farms, but you also have the farms with the chickens. There are some issues with the chickens where the chickens are packed so closely together. Ignore my drawing, but if this is my chicken, pretend it's a chicken, although he doesn't look much like one. But if this is the chicken, because they're so close together, they fight. And so what they will actually do is de-beak the chicken. And I know I have some friends a friend that worked in a chicken plant at one point, and that was somebody's job. They'd grab the chickens while they're still alive, and they'd cut off the tips of their beaks. And the reason they cut the tips of their beaks off is so that the birds can't fight, because they are so close together. Tensions get very high, and you have a lot of fighting, and that's just something that they can do to help them out, or to help prevent the fighting. Also, when you have your hens and your pigs and stuff that are grown in these types of conditions, they get a lot of diseases, so they get sick a lot. And if you're getting sick a lot, then what they give them are antibiotics. And you don't need to write this down, but because they have antibiotics so much, you start leading to antibiotic resistance. There's videos that you can watch. There's this one, and I'm going to write this out because I want you to make sure you are hearing me correctly. It's called What the Health on Netflix. It's a documentary, and the goal of it really is to try to make you go vegan, but it does have some interesting, windows that they show you into some of the meat industries, like where they will have the pigs that they're going through and they're having to cut out the pus pockets and stuff, and that's because they're they're raised in such bad conditions. There have been so many hormones at times given to things like chickens that their legs will break underneath them because of the weight. You also have, like if you're ever following behind a chicken truck, because you see those around Greenville a lot, you'll notice that some of them are already dead. They didn't even make it through transport because their health was so bad. And then we go on and we eat that. If you ever notice when you go to Walmart, there are some chicken breasts that are just giant. Okay, imagine, that's not how big a chicken is supposed to be. A chicken is not supposed to be the same size as a small pig. And so the way they get that is by adding in a lot of hormones and steroids into their diet. They also won't give them the necessarily correct diet. At one point, there was actually some ground chicken being served to chickens, kind of like cannibalism. Now, the public got a hold of this information, got really upset, like, that's disgusting, you can't do that. And so then you started seeing a lot of farmers advertising the fact that it's a vegetarian-fed diet. Well, chickens aren't vegetarians because they also eat bugs. They aren't supposed to eat other chickens, but they'll also eat bugs. And that's a U, not an A. So they aren't technically vegetarian. So a lot of times if you hear the vegetarian diet, you got to ask, are they only eating corn? Because if they're only eating corn, that also isn't what a chicken's supposed to be eating. If you just have subsidized corn, you still have another issue with not getting the right health. So you can't always trust the advertisements that are given within the different meats and any product, any advertisement really. You can't always trust it. You can look into some of the background of it, but just stay informed. But those are some of just a look into how some of these industrial farms act. So let's look at some practices of industrial farms. Remember, industrial farms is the same thing as traditional or conventional. Industrial farms have what we create or call a monoculture. And I have bolded what you're supposed to write. Down at the bottom when you get there, I know you can't see it because of the Docery desktop thing, but what it says, I will write. Let's see. I'll write up here. It's just talking about pesticides are used. So when you get down there, that's what it says. Anyway, so monoculture is a lot of land that only grows one crop. Mono means one. So you just have one type of crop that's being grown in a very large space. So for instance, say you're just growing corn. It'd be acres and acres and acres of corn. Well, because you're only growing corn, you don't have a lot of diversity going on. So that's why it reduces your biodiversity. The other thing it does is it depletes the soil of a specific nutrient. Say that corn, and I'm just going to put this in very simple terms, say corn uses up a lot of nutrient A from the ground. Well, if that's the main nutrient it's using and that's the only crop you have grown, all of nutrient A is going to be taken up and used up by that corn. So what do you have to do as a farmer? Well, you now have to go back and add in a lot more nutrients so that your corn can keep growing. Well, the only way that you can do that is by adding a lot of fertilizer. And we already know why fertilizer can be an issue. Hopefully you know at least, or hopefully you remember. But fertilizer runoff creates a lot of, or the whole process of it is called eutrophication. So the more fertilizer you have, the more eutrophication you have, and we already know the impact that has. Monocultures also make it very easy for pests to destroy, and that's why they're using a lot of pesticides. Because say I'm a little bug and I move into that cornfield and I'm all happy because, look, I just got all the food of my dreams right in front of me. Well, I'm going to go get my little buddies, and I'm going to bring my little bug buddies in, and we're going to eat that entire crop. And as a farmer, if I as a bug eat your entire crop, what did you just lose? You just lost your livelihood. So in order to protect against that, these farmers have to use a lot of pesticides to kill all the bugs to make sure that their crop doesn't get destroyed. But we know pesticides are an issue because what's the big disease that they are linked to? Cancer. Pesticides are a known carcinogen causing agent, so we have to be very careful with that. So that's your monoculture. One crop reduces biodiversity. It gets rid of the nutrients in the soil. Therefore, we use more fertilizer. It also makes it very easy for pests to destroy everything, and so that's why we use more pesticides. So I will pause for a second in case y'all are still writing things down. And if you're not writing things down, then this is just awkward silence, but trying to be mindful of y'all that may write a little slower than others. Okay, I'm going to clear the screen and I'm going to move on. So if y'all still need to pause the video, then go for it, but I've got to keep on going. Next slide. Pesticides. You don't have to write anything down on this, but the reason pesticides are an issue, this is review, which is why you don't need to write down. We know pesticides can run off into the water, and from that runoff, that's when you get the pesticides that are now contaminating water, and they can cause cancer. Now notice this guy is spraying pesticides on a crop, and he is wearing a mask and everything to make sure he can't breathe it in. If he's not wanting to breathe it in, what makes you think we want to then eat it? So always wash your produce. Make sure that you're trying to get stuff like that off. But if, again, we don't want it in our water, we don't want an excessive, pesticides have to be used at times. But the point of this is you don't want ever there to be an excessive amount of this added on. We saw the stuff about DDT. people just go crazy with things, and that's what we don't want, is people going crazy, because again, that's what we consume. Because we are not growing our own food, you're just having to eat whatever people are giving you and whatever they're growing. And so you don't want more pesticides than what have to be used ever on the things that you're putting into your body. So pesticides can cause resistant superbugs. So I want you to write down this top part. That's what's bolded. And then if you don't know what a superbug is, then you can write down a little description of it underneath it. But at least have this top part bolded. So I'm sure you've all heard of antibiotic resistance. The more you give animals or people, that's why when you go to the doctor, they aren't supposed to always prescribe you antibiotics. The more you take those antibiotics, there's some bacterium that don't die from them because their DNA is just a little bit different. And because of that, that particular bacteria will go on, they will keep multiplying, and they'll keep living within you. So you have to give them a new antibiotic in order to try to kill them. Well, if they are resistant to that, if you keep taking that same one, over time some will evolve to become resistant. And then you have this bacterium that no antibiotic is going to be able to kill. Well, and we call that a superbug in terms of a germ. Well, this is a superbug in terms of an insect. It's because you have all of these pesticides you use, but there's a couple little bugs that just happen to survive. And so they go on to reproduce, and now your pesticides aren't working. So you've got to create a stronger, more potent pesticide and use that, or a different one and use that. And the more you keep doing that, the more you have these resistant strains of bugs that can go on and eat all of your crops. So you're just adding more toxicity to the crops the more that this happens. So the less pesticides you can use is better, just like the less antibiotics we take are better. Sometimes they're called for, but never in an excessive amount, because we do get that resistance. And if anybody is still confused on what a superbug is, there's probably somebody in the class who's heard of it, and you can always ask them, or you can Google it and look it up on YouTube. Just make sure you're not watching videos about bugs being a superhero, because that is incorrect. Okay, fertilizers. You also don't have to write this down because it's review, and you already know everything because you've already been studying for this exam. But fertilizer runoff can cause eutrophication, and that's our big issue. So we have more fertilizers because of the monocultures, because the nutrients have been taken away. We add the fertilizer, it runs off, it causes eutrophication. Eutrophication leads to algae bloom, and that will choke out your ecosystems. And the reason it chokes out the ecosystems is because when the algae bloom dies, it uses up all of the dissolved oxygen. So this is just the picture form. Fertilizer, rain, runs off, algae bloom grows. You can see in this bottom right picture that you have the algae bloom that is blocking the sunlight. So those plants are going to die. The fish is going to die. Any fish that did survive, he will also die, because all of the oxygen is going to be gone, and it's just going to be death. So death of the ecosystem, and that's not good. So that's one of your issues with eutrophication. Moving on. Overgrazing. This is another issue caused by monoculture, or not monoculture, industrial farms. So this is another practice that you can often see. This is when animals graze too long in a particular area. And if an animal is grazing, such as like cattle, they graze the fields, that means they're walking through the fields and they're eating the grass. Well, if you're trying to grow the most amount of food in the smallest amount of space, that means you're going to have one field for your cattle, because you don't want to have multiple fields for them, because you're trying to use the least amount of space possible. Well, if those animals are grazing in that one field and that one field alone, and they're staying there for very, very, very long periods of time, then as they eat that grass can't grow back. And so overgrazing is going to lead to a loss of vegetation. So what are some things that a loss of vegetation is going to cause? Well, you're going to have a lot more erosion. You've got degraded soil. You now are missing nutrients. You're missing the plants that you need in order for them to grow, period. So what you're going to have to use is just something else to subsidize that they're feeding, or you're going to have to grow more, and you're going to, again, use more fertilizer. So this is often caused because agriculture practices that are poorly managed. Anybody ever been to Simply Natural Creamery? Well, I wish we could all go there on a field trip. One, because I like ice cream, but two, they are what we call a sustainable farm. And one thing they'll show you is they put the cows out to pasture in one field, and then they will move them over to another field to allow them to graze there. And that helps the grass to grow back. It gives it time to recover from everything that it's been eating. So next slide. Where are we now? So we're going to look at the strengths and weaknesses of conventional or traditional farms. So the strengths, the good things. Your traditional farms have a lot of food, so abundant food. Think about it. If you go to the grocery store, unless it's a hurricane, you never have to wonder about them being out of something. There's always, and even if it's a hurricane, they're all out of bread. Or snowstorm, you're out of bread, which I don't know why everybody just goes to get bread. But there's still food all in the grocery store. And if it's not food in that grocery store, you could go to any other one. We never have to worry about stores running out of food. We have tons of it. So much so that a lot of food is just thrown away and wasted. We have such an abundance that it just is, tossed to the side because we just have more than what we can use. We have fresh fruits and vegetables year-round. So that's another benefit is the year-round food. Usually, if there's blueberries that can only be grown in the spring or summer, well, you can still go buy blueberries in the winter because they have different things and practices with greenhouses and whatnot that allow us, or they can fly food in like bananas from another side of the world. The next thing is cheap food. I don't know if any of you know anything about grocery stores, but they're expensive. That's why I do all my grocery shopping at Aldi and Lidl, and very few at other places, just to help save some money. But if you can grow the most amount of food in the smallest amount of space, you can make your food a little bit cheaper. That's why the traditionally grown food is going to be more expensive than the organically grown food, because they can make the food with a cheaper price. Well, because people are all about saving money for an understandable reason, they are unable to compete with those prices. And so that can run some other businesses out of business. Another success is preservation. So think about it. If you get bread, you could put that bread in your refrigerator, or you could keep it on your counter for over a week easily, and that bread is absolutely fine. But if you've ever made homemade bread, by the end of that week, you're probably going to need to start checking that bread for mold. We have food that it will stay good for an unnatural amount of time. Kind of like people get a hamburger from McDonald's and then a year later there's no mold on it. That's not normal. That is not normal at all. Things aren't meant to stay good that long. It's very convenient for us that it does. It means we don't have to buy as much. But think about it. You are eating those preservatives that were put into the food. So that is a strength because it's very convenient. But it is a weakness, and also because preservations aren't always good. Now, freezing and refrigeration, that's absolutely fine. But some of the preservatives that are put into other foods, that can be a little questionable about the health, if that's all you're eating, if you're eating a lot of food with preservatives in it. So those are your successes, and we're going to now look at some of the weaknesses. One of the weaknesses is safety concerns. So you've got food poisoning, antibiotic resistance, pesticides, resistance, mad cow disease, which is not common, by the way. But you have all these diseases associated with these industrial farms because, again, some of the plants and the animals are not put in the most healthy of conditions. And therefore, because they aren't healthy, they can spread diseases, and we could get diseases from eating them. Another thing is, even with all the abundant food we have, there's still hunger in the world. So abundant food is not necessarily the answer for solving hunger. It's not like that's why we still have hungry people around. Another thing is the rise of obesity. With the amount of food and the amount of preservatives and convenient food rather than just like natural fruits and vegetables, we do see an increase in or a decrease in health with that. You also have failing small farms. I talked about how when you have organic prices, you can't compete with the inorganic prices. The small family farms often have trouble competing with these giant industry farms, and so they'll be ran out of business. And then you have a lot of farm accidents or stuff like that, or you don't have a lot, but there's so much machinery you can. And that's because instead of relying on people to work, your industrial farms are going to work on a machine. Because once you buy the machine, you don't have to pay the machine. You don't have to have benefits for the machine. You don't have to have insurance for the machine. It's just a piece of equipment. So these farms will try to have machinery take over any jobs that they can rather than have people fill them, which also means they're going to use more fossil fuels. And we know fossil fuels have CO2, which can cause global warming, and so on and so on. Okay, so those are the successes and the problems with your conventional farms. Next, we are going to look at our sustainable farms. So before we move on to sustainable farms, I'm going to let you go ahead and pause the video and just take a 2-minute brain break to stretch and wake up, and just kind of, mainly wake up because we do have to continue on with notes to finish them. But give the class about 2 minutes, let them wake up and pause the video, and we will resume after those 2 minutes.